Today, I am giving you the 5 questions that clarify your brand and boost your sales. If you ever rambled through an elevator pitch, confused a potential client, or felt like your brand was clear in your head but not so much out loud, this video is for you. I am discussing the 5 powerful questions that instantly bring clarity to your brand message and why you need to answer them if you want to connect faster, convert more, and cut through the noise like a hot knife through warm butter. So grab your favorite drink, pull up a chair, and let's get into it. Question number 1. Who exactly do you serve? This is a big one because vague marketing gets vague results. Saying I help everyone is the fastest way to say I help no one. You need to get painfully specific here. For example, let me share with you who I am here to serve. And let me do that by telling you a story. If you can relate to this story, then I am here to serve you because I decided to serve the people that can most relate to, that I have common ground. People that in the past, I've literally worn their shoes. So if you can relate, I'm here to serve you. And for me, I'll start, in 1978, my mom migrated to New York City, for very similar reasons that everybody during her time, and that is to pursue the American dream, to give us a better life. She did her best. My mom and dad, they did their best. I was born in Lower East Side in New York City, and then I grew up in Brooklyn for most of my life. And I realized from a very young age that the odds were stacked against me before I was even born. I hate to say this, and it brings me no joy to say it, but if you're brown, if you're black, if you don't look a certain way, things are going to be very difficult for you. And this is me not trying to play a victim role because that's not me. For me, I'm the kind of person that if I want something, I go after it no matter what. But I have seen personally that I had to overcome a lot more obstacles than some of the people that had a very different American experience growing up here in this country. For me, one of the first times that I was able to see that, right, was in the educational system. So if I can think about when I was in junior high school, I was in a class packed with like 45 students or more. So think about 45 students for one teacher. Our poor teachers were spreading themselves thin and trying to teach us as much as they can. Sometimes, some of us fell through the cracks because we didn't have the support that we needed. And the teacher didn't have the bandwidth to do it. Then going to high school, I struggled, for many reasons. I struggled because I always had to worry about how we were going to pay bills. I had to help my parents pay for bills. I started working from a very young age, and money was a distraction for me. So it's no surprise that I actually finished high school late. But, for me, while going through this educational system and realizing that, the school system was really set up for us to fail, there were some amazing teachers that I had. For me, I'll never forget Mr. Antoine. Mr. Antoine was, my math teacher in junior high school. And he was inspiring for me because this was a gentleman that he came from the hood in Brooklyn like ourselves. And he left. He graduated with a master's from NYU and came back to teach us because he said, I wanted to give back to the community. I figured my way out of the hood and I live so much better now. And I want to come back because each one should teach one, right? And it is the best thing that we can do is to give back. People like him told me that, the most selfish thing to do is to know something and not share it with other people. And so having role models like that really inspired me, build that hunger inside of me for more, right? And to get out of the hood because it sucks, like nobody wants to be in that. And so long story short, for me, my way out of the hood was to serve in the Marine Corps. When 9/11 happened, I was maybe a mile and a half away from the Twin Towers because I was in Washington Irving, which is a performing arts school in Union Square and is not too far from the World Trade Center. And I remember when the second, plane hit, it was chaotic. It was pandemonium. It was a lot of chaos in my school. And so that event, 9/11, hit home for me. It was very personal. I knew that I wanted to serve my country. I want to, in some way, get payback. Yeah, it was just a personal thing that I experienced. And, I also knew that it would be a great platform for me to go into higher levels. And for me, more than anything, I feel that it was a way of taking my mom's dream to the next level because she worked really hard for me. And this was my opportunity to serve my country. And for better or worse, I knew that by doing that, there was going to be a lot of doors that were going to open up as a result of that. As a matter of fact, before I even signed the contract with my recruiter, I just asked him one question. I said, hey, man, if I sign this contract and I serve for 5 years, would I get my college paid for? And he said to me, if you keep your head down and you keep your nose clean, you should be straight. I served my country. I went to Iraq. I went to Afghanistan. I came back. And he was right. I kept my nose clean. I kept out of trouble the entire time. And after that, I went to a Jesuit school. I went to Fordham University. I had somebody that took me under his wing, Marine Corps officer. He was a Harvard graduate and a Columbia graduate. And he introduced me to the idea, right, of considering Ivy League education. For me, I thought that it was so far beyond reach for me. And, he told me, listen, if you get on the Dean's list, at Fordham University, which is a good school, I'll do everything I can for you to get tested and see if you can place at Columbia. And, long story short, again, I graduated from Columbia thanks to his help. I remember preparing for that placement test. It was one of the most difficult years for me because I was working full-time at the Harvard Club. I was full-time at Fordham University student, keeping up my Dean's List grades, and I was preparing for this Columbia placement test. So it was so stressful for me, right? But I did it because, again, for me, I wanted to take my mom's dream to the next level. And I had the opportunity to work in Wall Street for my first job out of Columbia. And I think that's when things started to change for me. Oh, and I actually skipped this, right? But going to Columbia was a real eye-opener once again because, yeah, of course, I understand that I've been out of school for a while, right? I served for 5 years. And so by the time that I was going back to college, it's been way over 7 years that I, hit the books. So, of course, I was rusty there. But overall, when it came to, and I'll be honest, when it came to basic math, basic grammar, I realized that I was so far behind compared to my peers. And people that, yeah, they were fresh, they were just out of high school and they haven't taken a long break like myself, but I mean, academically, they were miles away from me. And in terms of how they studied, they had skills that I never learned. So that was really tough because I had to literally study the room and see who was the smartest person in the room, who was getting the highest grades, and literally study them and figure out hey man, can you tell me a little bit more about how do you get prepared for exams? And what do you do? What works for you? And I literally just copied what other people did because I didn't have that framework. I didn't have that structure. And so I had to figure out what worked for me. It was a lot of trial and error until I eventually got into a groove and picked up, systems that I learned from, one person here, another person over there, and I kind of adapted. My studying system was like a Frankenstein, from different approaches that people did. And that's how I got through college. But a lot of conversations I had with them, they were like, yeah, like they taught us how to study. We learned this approach since I was like in junior high school and elementary. For them, their studying system was so refined because they've been doing it for so many years. So by the time they got to college, yeah, they were learning new stuff, but their approach to learning was solid, by then. And now, for better or worse, I'm competing with them in the classroom if I want to have a decent, GPA, a decent grade. I think that I had to really struggle and work my butt off, to do a 4-year degree in 3 years, to the extreme that this might sound a little psycho, but I would leave my house, and at the time I was married, and my newborn was a couple months old, and I would leave my house on a Monday morning with my deployment bag. The same deployment bag that I went to Afghanistan with all my notebooks, my sleeping bag, hygiene stuff, all this, because I would get there Monday morning, I would go to classes, I would then take a shower, right? Study for the rest of the night, study until like 11 o'clock or probably sometimes 12. And I would go, and if anybody from Colombia is watching this, I'm sorry, but I would go in between the stacks in the library. So if you don't know what the stacks are, I mean, there's like basically the lines or the rows of books that are in, a lot of times they're in the back area of a library. They're not at the front where you normally study. They're in the back area. And this is just basically where you go get a book, right? But there's just like really long hallways of books. And that's what I did. Like I put my sleeping bag in between of, one of those hallways. I would find like the one that was like the furthest away or the darkest. And I would sleep there for like maybe 4 hours, 5 hours, wake up and do it all over again on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And I would end up coming back home on Thursday night. So I really grinded because for me, I had to overdo it to that extreme just to compete with people that, number one, already were really smart, but they already had really solid foundation when it came to studying. I didn't have that. So I had to go there and grind and make it work for myself. And, I think that that's one of the things of coming from a tough neighborhood, that no one ever hands you anything. And I'm not just saying that it's exclusive to us people that come from tough neighborhoods, but in my personal experience, because I had to hustle so much and figure things out on my own and figure out how to get things that I needed and wanted, this was no different. I think that the other upside for me was serving in the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps, we're the smallest, but we're the mightiest. We don't have a lot of resources. Our budget is always very limited. And I think that if I think about it, like it was so similar to growing up, having ambitious goals or wanting to do ambitious things, but not having a lot of money. You learn really quickly. I laugh, but it's kind of sad to be creative with whatever you have and be resourceful. So I think growing up, not with not a lot of resources and serving in the Marine Corps where resources again were limited, I learned how to make the most with what I had. And that's exactly what I did, and I think that helped me a lot, when I landed my first job at Wall Street. But I think that once again, it was an eye opener because now when I'm having like social conversations about, what do you do after work? A lot of them are talking about, I'm going to go golfing. I'm going to go play tennis, all this stuff. Somebody from the hood in Brooklyn, like I'm 40 years old. So back in the day, like no one's playing tennis or freaking golfing in Brooklyn. There's nowhere to do that anyway. We played freaking basketball by cutting a crate of milk open from the bottom and, like with literally like wire, just like tying it to a pole. And that's how we play basketball. We play basketball outside in the street, we played baseball wherever we could find, down the block. So it was hard for me to relate with people, and I guess make those kind of like social connections because I couldn't relate. I felt in some way out of place. Anyway, and for me, working in corporate was an eye opener. I learned that for me, Wall Street wasn't a good fit. And I ended up then eventually going to something more creative. I did software design. And then after that, I worked in consulting. And I felt like there I could be more open and I can be more creative for sure. And for me, that's where the real game started, because, and when I say game, like the real knowledge started to happen, to take place, right? Because now I'm sitting at these tables with, Fortune 500 executives, and I'm starting to learn, how they're going about approaching really ambitious goals, and, learning that a lot of these leaders, like, they don't have the answers. They're just good leaders. They don't have the answers, but they hire people that are really smart at a particular thing, and they put together a team of folks to work together for a common goal. And that's, for me, where I started to learn frameworks that are really powerful, that help people achieve really ambitious outcomes, right? Really ambitious goals. And so for me, I think that it came to a point where, unfortunately, and this has been just over a year now, on July 4th of 2024, at my last job, because in between that I worked in a consulting firm, no specific industry, just, a lot of different industries we served. Then after that, I was reached out by a headhunter, and I worked at a social media platform as a designer and a researcher. So I designed a lot of the, user experiences in that social media platform, but I also conducted a lot of research that supported those designs. And I was brought in there to bring hyper growth. And then another headhunter reached out to me for my last job, and that was working at a pharmaceutical consulting company out of New York City. I worked out of the Empire State Building, and interestingly enough, out of all days, they pick July 4th of 2024 to let me go. And they were leaning out because they hire a lot of us. And that's true. I was one of the hires that came in during COVID. So there was a correction happening. And I was part of that correction. I got let go. And, I got to give credit to the people at the company I worked at, because they worked really hard to, put me in a marketing team, put me in other teams. They didn't want to let me go. They tried really hard. I saw that. They tried really hard to keep me, just put me somewhere else. And, it didn't happen. And I think that's where I decided to say, okay, what can I do with everything that I know, right? And say, I think one thing I also learned from all this experience is that the table is made for, a specific kind of person. And, the rules, this game that we all play is designed for a specific group of people to succeed. And I saw that because I was able to see that by the people that were in charge, by the people that I worked for. And I said, okay, there's a lot of people that go around and say, I want to get a seat at the table. And for me, respectfully, I say, screw that table. Because I know that the way the game is designed, when I say game, think about like Monopoly, right? Because Monopoly really is a game that teaches you how to make money, fake money. But if you apply the principles, you can make money the same way, literally, in the physical world. But, when I think about like the game, it was designed for a specific group of people to take a seat at that table. And it's not always, the people that sit at that table are not always brown and black people. That doesn't mean that it never happens. It does happen. But I'll tell you from personal experience, witnessing it myself, some people stay true to who they are, and a lot of people assimilate hard, like big time. And that's the price they pay to reach the top. That's not to say that there are some phenomenal leaders, you know, as far as like, just phenomenal leaders that are minorities, that are black, that are indigenous, that are brown, and they are at the top. They are CEOs of Fortune 500 companies without never having to compromise who they are. But the majority, you know what? I just leave it there. For me, I'll say that I didn't want to do that. I don't want to assimilate. I don't want to give up my identity. I know that it's difficult, and I'll say this, and I don't like to badmouth any company, but I speak from what I saw firsthand. When I worked in Wall Street, I worked at Morgan Stanley, and Morgan Stanley talked a lot about diversity and inclusion. And it's true. They hire a lot of people. They hire, white people. They hire brown people. They hire, people from different ethnicities. But one thing I saw firsthand is that not all people have the same opportunities. And so one of the things that was so vivid for me was seeing people that were minorities like myself working in the middle office or the back office. So if you don't know what that is, it's basically admin work. And then people that were doing the sales, that were doing the trading, that were doing the roles that make the most money. For the most part, it was white people doing that. And I happened to have the rare opportunity of being in operations, but being in the capital markets group, which allowed me to be in the front office with the folks that are making a lot of money. And I'll give you an example of how I saw that the rules or the game is rigged, in my opinion. And this is my opinion, right? I was there for 2 years, and I remember working there, and working 2 years, I saw 2 waves of interns coming in, right? And I remember seeing the first wave, and I was like, oh, that's exciting, because I remember when I interned here at Morgan Stanley, and I talked to this young black woman. She looked really young, and I'm talking to her, and I'm telling her, like, where did you go to school? And she was telling me that I think she either was coming from Yale or coming from Harvard. It was an Ivy League school, and I think she was a junior. So I told her, like, have you done internships before? And she was like, oh yeah, as a matter of fact, I did. And I was like, where you intern? How many internships? She's like, oh, this is my second one. And so to me, it's impressive because she's a junior and this was her second internship. So that means she started from sophomore year. And at this point, her last internship was with Goldman Sachs. So I'm like, okay, Goldman Sachs, now Morgan Stanley. And I'm like, no, I'm lying. She was a senior. Yes, she was a senior. And this was her third internship because she did Bloomberg, then Goldman Sachs, and now this was her last one of her senior year. Yes, I'm lying. And Morgan Stanley. To me, I was like, man, this girl is impressive because she's been interning since sophomore. And I was like, there's no way this girl doesn't come back, right? And in September, I think, just about September is when the new wave of hires was coming in. It was my first time witnessing it. And I didn't see that girl. And, I didn't put one and one together. I didn't make anything out of it. I'm like, there's many reasons. Maybe they made an offer. She decided not to come. Who knows? I don't know. Then the second year comes, and then another wave of interns. And, a couple of brown folks, black folks there. Now it struck me because by the second September, again, I didn't see one brown or black person come and get hired. And I'm like, hold up a second. Hold up. Is it just me? And I remember that day, I'm like, I don't know. Is it just me, really? And I remember walking and taking a look around the floor and looking at, the sales folks, the people that were, sitting to my left, the traders, and looking at all the other folks that were in fixed income, exotic derivatives, the quants, everybody. And I'm looking around, I'm like, hold the heck up. There are only 3 brown and black people here. 2 brown, including myself and another black person. And I remember this black gentleman, he was in fixed income. He's been there for a while. He's about to retire. And I remember I grabbed him for lunch and I was like, "Hey man, let me ask you a question." I was like, and I explained to him everything that I saw, happen those 2 years. And, he just shook his head and he's like, "I think I know what you're going to ask me." And he's like, "Yeah, the answer is yes." And I was like, "What am I going to ask you?" And he was like, "You're probably going to ask me, you know, has this been happening since I started working here?" And I was like, "Yeah." I was like, because, in my humble experience, just for 2 years, this looks systemic. And he said, "Yeah, unfortunately it has been. And for the most part, he said, in my 20 years working here, I've never really seen, more than 3 or 4, black and brown folks in the front office." And for me, that was like the last drop, and then, of course, I remember I happened to get invited to a networking event. It was a warm gathering for so Morgan Stanley, a lot of Wall Street companies had a lot of headhunters going to my school. My school is what they call like a feeder school. And it's a feeder because they will go on there, recruit them, they will feed into their workforce. And so they had a class of seniors. It was a summit. And so they wanted, alumni from, from Columbia and other feeder schools to talk about, our experience and all of that. And there was like a 30-minute, networking event session, before the talk started. And I remember I approached a recruiter from Morgan Stanley, and I was upset at the time. And I remember telling her, like, "Hey, this is what I've seen the past 2 years. Like, what do you think about that?" And she was like, "No, I don't think that's true. Like, we believe in diversity and inclusion, and we hire people, and we have the data to prove it, that we have black and brown people here, and you are, you're one of them. You're an example." Honestly, I feel like when people say, "Oh, we have the data to prove it," when they have to defend themselves, I think we have a bigger problem. And I said to her, "You're right. Morgan Stanley, from my experience, does hire people, black and brown people, as part of their workforce. But when we come inside, we are not all treated equal." And so I shared with her in depth, like, my experience of what I saw 2 years at Morgan Stanley. And then I told her, "If you don't believe me, I'll take you to my office where I work in the front office," right? Because I was part of like the wealth management division, capital markets. And I said, "And now let's go to people that I still know that work in the back end operations. And let's take a look at the population that works in those 2 different buildings." And I said to her, "I guarantee you, without a doubt, if we were to go tomorrow, we will see that 95% of the people on the front office making most of the money and having most of the leadership positions are in my office, and brown and black people that don't get the same opportunities and get paid a fraction of what those other people get paid, they are full in the back office. That back office is full of them." And I'm telling you, I've seen it with my eyes. And, I stopped myself because I realized I was getting emotional. I was getting heated. And I also know that there's only so much she could do. And so I was like, "You know what? All right, I digress." And I stopped the conversation. Anyway, I left the consulting. And I know I'm going like in a rant, but long story short, I'm in this situation now. And I'm like, okay, how do I leverage everything that I've learned working in all these different corporations and taking into account all the frameworks that I learned, working in Wall Street, working as a software designer, as a behavioral science researcher, helping with marketing projects, branding. How do I use all of this, and to pay it forward? For me, when I got fired and, trying to figure out what to do with my life, I still remember Mr. Antoine, my math teacher from junior high school in Bushwick, Brooklyn. And, him saying, one of the most selfish things we can do is to have knowledge and not share it. Each one teach one. And I said, yes, you're right. And for me, my goal is to teach business owners that are scrappy. Maybe they didn't have the corporate background that I did, but they're scrappy and they decided to build something for themselves because they realized, like myself, through a very different journey, that the table, right, to sit at and play this wealth game wasn't made for them. And they said, like I did, screw that table. I'm going to make my own table, right, for my own people. And I'm going to do it my way, live on my terms. So, folks like that inspire me. And I said, you know what? I think I probably can leverage everything that I learned to give back, because I've been in those, behind closed door conversations, in those rooms, in those meetings. I've seen what they do. I see how they do it. I've learned from them. They taught me. What if I am to put my people on game? People that came from a similar background like me, people that came from the hood, people that are scrappy, people that have their own businesses, people that realize that, we are disenfranchised from this economy and this system, people that want to grow, right? Because they realize I have to make my own table. People that are hungry to succeed. It brings me sadness for me that I couldn't show my mom her American dream come to fruition. In my head, and I remember telling her when I was a kid, like, one day, Mom, like, I'm going to take you, I'm going to buy this big house, with a lot of things, and, you're going to live comfortable, and I'm going to give you all this. And, for me, that was the day that finally, I would take my mom's dream to the next level. And unfortunately, I didn't have that opportunity, but maybe that's not the case for you. Maybe you are also, a person that is son of immigrants, or maybe your parents came from all the different places of, part of the U.S. and migrated to big cities because they wanted to change their lives. And they sacrificed so much for you so that you feel that you owe it to them. And you've made, wealth for yourself. You made a business for yourself. But you want to take it 10 times, higher than your parents ever thought. And maybe you are stuck at a situation, in a spot, because you don't know what to do, because what you did before, right, doesn't work anymore. There's a thing we learn in consulting that says that every level has its devil. So maybe you're stuck at this level's devil, and you're not able to grow even higher. And like myself, maybe you're doing all of this, you're working so hard to make your family proud, but more than anything, because you want to gather resources that, for you, money is just a medium. Money for you is just a tool that allows you to have the resources to live a good life with your family. Because for you, the most important thing, like me, is to spend time with our family, right? So that's who I'm here to serve. People that have a very common background. And I think that I will leave it at that, because it was a really long section here to say, who am I here to serve? And I went really far back. Needless to say, I've done my research to figure out, for me, the people that I care about, what are their frustrations? What are their goals? What are their motivations? What are their desires? What is the transformation they seek, right? And so I've spent time to figure out the answers to those questions and figure out, okay, well, how can I help them answer those questions? How can I help them get that transformation they desire? How can I get the people that I'm here to serve go from slaving at work, working really long hours because they're trying to throw spaghetti at the wall, trying to figure out what works, hoping that something sticks that gets them to grow to the next level. Or even worse, they just don't know what to do, right? And they're frustrated because they're missing out on family dates. They're not going to their kids' soccer games. They're missing out a lot of quality time. And truthfully, I know that if you had the money, you would take that money and go with them to a dinner. You would go on a vacation. You would make sure that you save money to put it in your kids' college education savings account. So that, because for you, what's important is that when they finally get to that point, they have enough money to go to whatever school they want to go to, right? And so for you, that is really important. That's why you're doing it, because you want to provide, you want to take care of your family. And those are the people that I'm here to serve. So as you can tell, I spend a long time thinking long and hard, who am I here exactly to serve? How am I going to serve them? And what are the questions I need to ask? And what are the questions I need to answer for them so that I can help them have the transformation that they want in their lives? So if you know exactly who you are here to serve, your brand gets sharper, stronger, and way more magnetic the moment you define that person. Pro tip, think about a human you'd love to work with and then build everything for them. Now let's discuss question number 2. What pain are they actually feeling? And that's a juicy one, because you, for example, might think, if you're a roofer, that your customers want a roof without leaks. Of course that's true. But what they actually want is peace of mind, knowing they can invite people over for dinner on a rainy day and not be embarrassed by a leaking roof and feeling like they're eating dinner inside a Six Flags water park. For example, let me take that a step even further. Someone like myself that provides branding and marketing services, and we think about, how are we here to serve our people? If you look at it at a surface level, you'll say, yeah, business owners want us to help them with generating more leads and helping them be able to close more sales, right? So they can make more money. That's what they want. Sure, at a surface level, I think that's true. But I think if we really think about it, the people, the business owners that we're here to serve, what they want is to have a peace of mind, knowing that we are providing them with a growth system that they can rinse and repeat and they can replicate, and they don't have to throw something on, spaghetti on the wall and figure out and hope that something sticks. That they have a system where they can systematically grow. They also want to be able to spend more family time, right? They want to actually do less and be able to have more sales closed, right? So that they can spend more time with their family, so that, they can stop missing those soccer games, start going to, all these different practices that their kids have, whether it's their daughter playing softball or, wrestling, or, of course, stop missing out on those, dinner dates with their wife, with their husband. That's really what they want. When, if you think about it, branding and marketing services that we may provide to business owners are just a vehicle, right? It's just a bridge to get them across to their actual goal, right? When we think about this, the freedom that they want, that's the actual goal they want. That's the real outcome that they want. So, when we're talking about what, pain they're actually feeling, we got to think about, we're helping somebody like that. The real pain they're feeling is that they're staying in longer hours, they're frustrated because they don't know what to do, or they're trying to figure out, how to grow and scale. They're very good, for instance, like let's say you're a carpenter, or you're an electrician, right? Or you're a doctor, you're a surgeon. You're really great at what you do, but you don't know anything about marketing. You don't know anything about branding, how to close sales, how to generate these leads. how to create interest, how to win over your customers' hearts and minds. You don't know that. So for you, that is overwhelming because that is the bloodline of your business, right? Like that's how you grow your business. So, it's important to understand, yeah, of course, identify the surface level issues, but more importantly, the underlying issues, right? And the underlying motivations that our audience wants. And, I think I gave this example and I'm looking over my notes. I want to make sure I don't miss anything. But if you think about, like, in another video, I talked about a vacuum. People, there's so many vacuums that do the same job, right? Which is essentially suck the crap out of the dirt off the floor, right? So you can have clean floors, clean carpets. There's so many ways to do that, right? And there's, vacuums that range from 60, 70 bucks all the way to $300, right? And if you think about it, well, I mean, if the job is to, clean the carpet, why the heck somebody will ever choose to buy a $300 vacuum over a $60 vacuum? Don't they do the same job? Sure, maybe at a surface level. But if you really think about it, not really. So and I think in that video that I was referring, and I'm going to talk about it now, I'm going to share with you, like, what's the reason why someone will justify that price. If someone is telling you that this vacuum, is $300, right? And they're not spending a lot of time thinking about, what are the features of this, vacuum, but they're actually telling you how it removes, thoroughly, dust and pet hair, and you are, for example, a person that you have a dog and you have a cat in the house, and you have a little one that has asthma, right? Let's say, for instance, you have a 2-year-old daughter that has asthma, and for you that is really important because you want to be able to keep your pets, but you also want to make sure, above all, that your daughter doesn't get sick, because to you as a parent, your daughter means the world to you. So knowing that this particular vacuum has been reviewed by doctors, for instance, I'm just making this hypothetical, right? Knowing that this, vacuum is proven to clearly and thoroughly clean all these things that can potentially get your daughter sick, that's the real pain that people are experiencing. That's the real reason why someone will justify going from spending $60 on a vacuum to $300, because what they're buying is that peace of mind. Because the real pain that they're experiencing is, not knowing that maybe because if they don't do a job well enough to clean their vacuum, to clean their floor, that their daughter might get sick. And that maybe suddenly out of nowhere, their daughter might get an asthma attack. And here they are rushing at 2 o'clock in the morning, right? And then the next day they got to go to work. They're tired, or even better, they have like a really important project the next day. They're heading out to the emergency room because their kid has an asthma attack. And now they're probably going to miss out, going on the next meeting the next day. That's the thing that people are thinking about. That's what will justify somebody buying something so expensive, right? When there's vacuums that do the same freaking thing, essentially, but if they know that this $300 one is going to get the job done, above and beyond, to the point that it's going to prevent their daughter from catching an asthma attack, they play it in their head and they think about, okay, my daughter doesn't get sick, right? So her health is being preserved. I don't have to worry about, potentially at a moment's notice having to rush to the hospital, potentially missing a day for work, not being there when I need to be for an important project, or running, whatever, business errand I need to take care of, right? That's actually what they're buying it. Because those things address the pain that they are trying to avoid. So these are just a couple of examples that highlight the importance of knowing the actual pains that your customer is experiencing. And I'll share this with you as a practice that I learned being a consumer behavior science researcher. And, we learned that in order to develop a product to, further enhance a solution, we always have to identify the root cause. One of my favorite quotes from one of my role models, my idol, is Albert Einstein. And he said, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I will spend 55 minutes understanding the problem and 5 minutes solving it. So where am I going with this? In research, we learned the power of the 5 whys. So whenever we were asking a particular question, just, whatever they say, okay, why? And then they give you the reason and then asking, but why that? And then they will give you whatever answer and then asking another why, on the backside of that. And the whole point of that is that when you're talking to someone and they answer a question, if you drill down with these whys, eventually you'll find the real reason why they're saying what they're saying, right? So I would challenge you to go and figure out what are the issues, or even write it down. Like if you know what are some of the pain points that, you think your customers have, think about questions that allow you to, use the power of the 5 whys and get you to drill down and discover the real pains that your customers are experiencing, the real pains they're trying to avoid, right? That are connected with your service. Because once you start speaking to those, then you're really going to start to resonate, right? And you're going to, and I'll go even further. In my opinion, I think you will strike gold once you discover the underlying root cause pain that they're experiencing, and it happens to be emotional, right? If you find that emotional underlying pain they're experiencing, that is gold. Because, for example, when I told you about, the parents are buying this $300 vacuum, if you think about that example I gave you, the real reason, the real pain that they're experiencing is emotional, right? Because there's the potential possibility that even after they clean their carpets, their daughter, this little being that they love with all their heart, gets sick. And as a father, I know that, there's nothing worse than seeing your own kid sick. Like, I speak from experience. Like when I used to see my kids sick, like I would sometimes pray to God, like, I wish you can just give it to me. Like I can just take it from them and have it myself. Because when we love our babies, we don't want to see them sick, right? We suffer sometimes. I mean, I can't tell you, like, I don't know for sure how much my daughter and my son suffer when they get sick, but I feel like I suffer more, seeing them sick than them being actually sick. So underlying pain that a parent was experiencing buying that $300 vacuum was emotional. So if you follow these 5 whys, if you do this exercise using these 5 whys to drill down the root cause of people's pain points and pain factors that are associated with whatever business, service, or product you provide, and you find the ones that are emotional, you have struck gold, my friend. Because once you start talking about what you do and how it helps them prevent or avoid those emotional pain points, you're going to resonate. You're going to make a really strong emotional connection, and they are going to be able to justify why they will need to buy from you and why they need to pay whatever price you're charging them. So that is how important it is. And I'll definitely create a video when it comes to later on in the future, when it comes to talking about how to conduct research to find, your target audience pain points, motivations, desires, goals, and how to leverage that when you are talking about, brand messaging. So the takeaway for question number 2 is that great brands speak to pains that are personal. They don't just say, we help you scale. They say, we help you stop missing bedtime stories because of late night admin work. You see the difference? Empathy unlocks connection, and connection builds trust. Question number 3, what transformation do you promise Here's the deal. People don't buy products. They buy outcomes. Let me repeat that for the people in the back. People don't buy products. They buy outcomes. So your brand has to answer this question. How is my life better after working with you? So to illustrate this, let me share with you the example of a client that I'm currently working with. And I would say that what she does for a living is pretty niche. You know, she helps high network individuals, specifically working moms, whether they are business owners themselves or they're, you know, C-suite level executives working, or, you know, partners if they happen to be at a law firm, you know, etc. So people are really busy, but they want to spend quality time with their kids, with their family, have time for themselves. Her services are, you know, dedicated to give that time back to, you know, these moms so they can do what they love to do and what's really important to them. And yeah, I was able to convey that not this way, but that's not how she spoke about her business when we first started talking. And, you know, I asked her a couple questions about, you know, what does she do, and, you know, how does she serve the clients, and, you know, what's the transformation that she makes. And yeah, to some extent, I guess I kind of nudged her, you know, and, you know, in these questions. It was more direct, and I didn't think really nothing was going to come out of it. It was just a networking event of, you know, different business owners. And as she was starting to explain to me really, you know, like what she does, you know, she did what I would say a lot of business owners do. Um, and honestly, I've seen all types of them do it, you know, from Fortune 500 CEOs all the way down to small business owners. And that is, you know, when you tell them, what do you do? What does your business do? They go in a rant telling you, you know, all the features of their services, you know, or they throw at you all this jargon that you have no idea what the heck they're saying. They might as well just be talking to you in a different language, right? You have no idea. And I think it's so natural, you know, like I said before, to just talk about, you know, what are the things that we do, because not a lot of thinking has to take place in order for just us to say what our products do or what do we do, you know, in our services. And as she told me, you know, what services she was doing and for who, and I started to ask her more questions, you know, I told her in that one time conversation we had, I was like, do you realize that the value of your services are not tangible? They have nothing to do with cleaning. And she was like, what? And I was like, yeah, if I'm just thinking about what you're saying right now, what you do has nothing to do with cleaning, has nothing to do with running errands, has nothing to do with all the stuff that you just told me about. And she was like, you know, I mean, it was along the lines I said to her, along the, you know, something along those lines. And, you know, I think she was a little puzzled. I mean, somebody told me that I would be puzzled too, completely normal. But I told her, no, like, you know, what you provide to these women is that you allow them, you give them time back on their hands so that they have that time to get to know who they are after being a mom for the first time, so they can spend more quality time with their babies, so they can have more time to build these beautiful memories with their family, you know, so they can do all these things that they want to do, and they're not feeling guilty, you know, for doing these things that they desire, you know, they're interested in, and thinking that there's a constant trade-off between being a mom and doing, you know, these things that they want to do because they're moms, they're adults, you know, they're human. And so, you know, I focused on that. And, you know, from there on, we started working together. And, you know, I've helped her a lot with, you know, teaching her how to sell what she does in a way that, yes, she talks at a high level what she does, you know, in terms of her services, but how to focus more, as I said before, right, on the outcome, selling the outcome, which in her case is giving back time to these busy professional moms so they can essentially have their cake and eat it, right? So they can be really successful entrepreneurs, so they can be really successful, business leaders, whether they're working for corporate or they're working for themselves, and be great moms and have that cuddle time with their little ones and have time to, I don't know, pursue an interest that they had, before. Maybe they were musicians and, they want to pick up, a piano and play again. Um, maybe they're interested in new hobbies, or maybe they want to have a big party and they want to be able to, have it at their house and not worrying about bringing all these drinks and all this stuff, but be able to socialize, with their family, knowing that everything is going to be taken care of, right? And so, you know, when we think about it, like that is the transformation that she was actually delivering to her customers, right? She was, I helped her craft a message that, tells her audience, which in this case are the moms, you can go from struggling, finding a way to keep up with all the workload, at work or your business, and then coming here and running around, and trying to do the best to take care of your kids and your family, or you can, hire me and work with me in a way that once you're working with me, I help you create a strategy and I help you figure out how to run your household efficiently so that when you come home, you know that you don't have to be working on a project, in the office while trying to figure out what you need to do when you get home. No, that's already taken care of, right? And so knowing that for them working with my client, they're able to have peace of mind, right? They're able to have, time back on their hands. They're able to spend their time, in the way that they actually want it, doing what they actually want, right? Which is with their loved ones, spending time for themselves, right? And so that is the transformation that, she's now selling, which is, going from this overworked person both at the office and at home to now having the freedom and the peace of mind that things are being taken care of home. And, these moms can go and show up 100% in whatever they need to do outside the office. And also for moms that, it's their first time and things are pretty scary, and, having that kind of guidance, it's really important. And, just being able to experience motherhood in a different way, so that they can care for their loved ones. So if I'm really trying to tie it all together, like you can see that the underlying reason for these moms is emotional, right? That what they care about is a transformation, that they're not buying the actual services. Sure, the services are always a vehicle, a medium to what they're actually buying, which is the outcome, right? And in this case is that transformation in how they live their lives as professionals, but more importantly, in this case, at home. So, I hope that was a good example that, further enhanced the point that I'm trying to make in terms of, the importance of knowing the transformation that you are promising to your customers. So, once again, think about in your case, what is the transformation that you are creating for your customers, for the people you serve when they work with you? And then figure out how to craft a message that sells that transformation. Because at the end of the day, when the dust settles, that is actually what they're buying from you. They're buying the outcome. They are buying the transformation. So for question number 3, you're not selling a service. You are selling a before and after. Tell the story, paint the picture, make the results so real they can taste it, and no, you don't have to overpromise. You just have to make sure that the transformation is tangible. Question number 4, what makes you different? This question trips people up because most people say, well, I care a lot. Cool. You and every other business owner that is not a robot. The question you need to answer here is, what's my edge? For this question, I'm going to share the example of a martial arts school owner who I helped with a marketing campaign that he was doing, right? So as we were talking about this, in our first discussion, he said something that really stood out to me. And he said to me, and I'm looking at my notes because I wrote it down. He said, I don't want to be known as another CKO kickboxing joint where people just go there to sweat, right? And, this person was teaching karate, and in there they were also having Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai. And, I told him, what makes you say that? And, for him, he was like, well, a lot of people that go to these places, they just go there to work out. It's not so much about doing the martial arts, right? And the intention when they're doing martial arts. And so, I talked to him and I said to him, well, for you, what does intention look like? And then, I told him, like, for you, what do you think that, makes your school different? Like, what makes you different from, as you said, CKO kickboxing? And, for him, he said that martial arts was really the instrument to inner transformation, right? That by doing karate, by doing jiu-jitsu, you became a better person, a more self-aware person, a more disciplined person. And he talked about, to the extent of like how that transformed him personally and how it allowed him to be a better human, when it came to his friends, when it came to, relationship with his parents, relationships with everyone as a whole, and I told him, I'm like, I think that's what makes you different. I think that we should focus on that. I think we should highlight that. And for me, that was personal because as a person that is a martial artist practitioner, like I was able to relate what he was saying with, what he was saying, right? Which he was talking about how, self-defense and learning how to fight is just the tip of the iceberg, but the real benefits are, underneath what we can't see is the invisible, really, the intangible, right? Like you said, discipline, being kind, being compassionate, being determined, being self-aware, aware of your surroundings, and how that transforms into you being a better person. And I feel like, yes, I said to him, like we should definitely, if you want me to help you run ads on marketing, we should talk about that. We should highlight that. And I think that's what makes you stand out. And, that's part of your brand. Your part of your brand is that martial arts is the vehicle for inner transformation, which allows them to, reflect the transformation in their outside world, right? So they're coming here, to transform their lives, and to transform the way they show up, in the world. And martial arts just happens to be that vehicle, and we were able to do that. And a lot of times it just takes a little bit of, just dialing things down, slowing things down, and really thinking about, and for him, what made him different was his story, right? And, you don't have to really dig deep, and try to, look for something that is not there or make up stuff, which is worse because people are always going to figure that out, but just taking time and really thinking about, okay, the service that I provide, the goods, that I provide, what makes it different? And a lot of times, in my opinion, what's going to make you different, it's you. It's your personal story. It's, what led you to start your business? Why do you care so much about helping your customers? How does it make you feel better? How does it impact you personally serving other people? That's what makes you different. That's what makes you stand out. And that's when you start to talk like a person, because you're talking about the unique things that make you different from other people, and you start sounding like a robot. I mentioned in my previous video, that sometimes marketing messaging can feel like, where's Waldo? And that people are not going to stick around long enough to find the freaking Waldo. So, when you are talking about what makes you different, that's when you stop talking, that nonsense, and, you stop sounding like a robot, and you start sounding like yourself, because you are talking about yourself. You are talking about, what makes you at a human level different, and why people should work with you versus someone else that does the exact same thing. And that is how you build an emotional human connection with your audience. Hey, let me ask you a serious question. What would your life look like if your business finally attracted the right people consistently? The truth is, most entrepreneurs don't have a sales problem. They have a messaging problem, an emotional connection problem, a brand that doesn't sell problem. That's why I'm inviting you to join me for the Sell With Your Brand 5-Day Challenge. In just 5 days, I'm going to show you the same emotional branding system we use at MMA Marketing to help business owners grow exponentially. Not by working harder, but by speaking straight to the hearts of the people they're meant to serve. You'll walk away with clarity, connection, and a strategy that helps you earn more by having more time with your family and the freedom you deserve. Click the link below to save your seat. I highly recommend that you lock in your VIP spot where I'll be doing Q&A every day to answer your exact questions. Let's build a brand that sells with heart. See you inside. Question number 5. What do you want them to do next? After someone reads your website, hears your pitch, or watches your video, what is the next step? For this last question, I'm going to share with you an example of when I worked at a social media platform and I was hired to help them achieve hyper growth. So for us, that was the overarching main goal for the year that I came in. We wanted to have 10x growth. And so everything that we did, essentially, danced to that, drum beat. So I was hired in as a software designer, but I was also brought in, to do the research that would allow, the social media company to differentiate themselves from people like Facebook. At the time it was Twitter, and, Snapchat and all, these other social media platforms that were playing a big role, in America. So we were able to find the information. We were able to find what people may call white space, or a simpler name. It's areas of opportunity that we can differentiate ourselves as a social media platform. And then I propose the designs. I propose the things that we can do different and how we can do them different while, maintaining our ethical grounds and making sure that it's still a place where people feel safe to come and socialize in the digital world, and how to customize that, per, the culture norms in whatever country we were growing in. And so we were able to do that. And I think we did a phenomenal job, because at the end of the year, we did achieve that 10x growth. We actually superseded that 10x growth. And a lot of it had to do with, honestly, an underlying topic that is echoed throughout every single question that I've talked about. And there's one word, in my opinion, that can summarize every single question and an answer essentially for every question, which is intentionality, right? When we were designing these features on the social media platform, we were very intentional through design, to nudge people to do things in an invisible format that they didn't even realize there would be a nudge to. Or in some cases, we openly gave them very clear call to actions with a very clear and simple path to do that. One of the examples was giving them very similar. We took this, page from, LinkedIn, which is very similar to recommending them, people that we believe they would want to socialize based on their interests, based on people they were already following, based on common grounds that they had with other people. But we were able to, on top of that, layer it with other new features that we believed at the time were white spaces, and that further enhanced the use, because essentially there we created a network effect, right? So more people use it, it becomes more valuable, and we all use it more. And for that social media company at the time, having exponential growth and really good retention was really valuable, because our business model was very similar to that of Instagram, right? Which is that we were able to sell really expensive advertisement space because we had a really strong, consistent user base. So more eyeballs equals more money for ads. And it's a business model that social media copied from television, and copied from radio. Just of the amount of people that on a consistent basis listen to the radio, and that's how they're able to justify the amount that they were going to charge. But anyway, I think that what I really want to emphasize in this example is that we were very intentional about having really clear message that explained to the user, in this case in the social media platform, what we wanted to do, what we wanted them to do, why it was beneficial for them, right? Because this is one thing that a consultant told me, whenever it comes to selling a project to a client, or selling an idea to other people that you're working with. At the time, in the projects that I used to work in this consulting firm, we were working with software engineers, data architects, client stakeholders, the business owner. We were working with a diverse group of people. And he said, especially the people that pays the bills, right? That pays for the services or the goods that we improve. You always want to think about this one question, which is what it's in it for me. So every time that you tell somebody to do something, you always got to tell them what's in it for them, right? Why they should do what you're telling them to do. And that's something that we always kept at the forefront, whenever it came to giving these new users the guidance to what we wanted them to do, how we wanted them to use a social media platform, and how it was going to benefit them. And I'm saying that, and I'm just looking at my notes, making sure that I have everything. I'm saying that because I think that you want to have a similar approach, and this is how I help clients have a similar approach. And, I tell them branding, marketing, everything I do can be summarized into one word: intentionality. So I always tell them, think about what you want them to do. Make sure you're very clear to them. Make sure you're very intentional about it, and make sure you tell them what's in it for them, right? Why they should listen to you. But yes, I think that that's really important. I think if you notice, like even in my videos, in every video, I give you a very clear call to action at the end of each video. If you go to my website, MMAmarketing.co, you'll see that there are very specific call to actions to what I would like you to do when you're visiting my platform. What are the next steps? So, this brings me to my last point, when it comes to this question. You want to think about what is the user journey. So, and I'm stealing this from when I used to be a software designer. And so if you don't know, when we are designing a user experience, we're really thinking about every single thing. We're thinking about, from the time you download the app for the very first time, what you're going to do, all the way to you are like a pro master user, right? So we think about from point A all the way to point Z. So everything in between, you can call that a user journey, right? So I think I will invite you to think about what is the user journey for your customer audience. What does that look like? And so depending on where you are in that journey, if you're selling yourself for the very first time, what's the next step? Let's say, for instance, I hope there's not a lot of steps, but let's say, for instance, there are like 6 steps for someone that never met you and doesn't know you from a fly on the wall to, becoming your customer. And let's say, for instance, there are like 6 steps in order for them to do that. Have them laid out, know exactly, what those steps look like. Sometimes the sequence might not take place the way you have it envisioned, but have an idea what that is, what that looks like, what the user journey looks like. So when, depending on where you are with a particular client, or a prospect, you know what is the next step you want them to take, right? So you're very intentional because you took time to think about what is the user journey you want them to experience. And you're taking time as you're talking to them, what you're saying to them, what is the next step you want them to take. And as I said, this is a pro tip. Just when you're telling somebody what to do, always make sure you answer the question, what's in it for me, right? And explain to them, hey, this is what's in it for you if you do this step. So I hope this makes this last question clear. So for our last question, unclear brands don't convert because people don't know what to do. Every touch point in your brand should guide people with clarity and confidence. Tell them what to do and tell them what they'll get for doing it. That's how you move people from interested to invested. All right, family, let's land this plane. These 5 questions are simple but powerful. Answer them clearly and consistently across your brand, and I promise you, you'll feel more confident, your message will hit harder, and your sales will start to reflect it. And hey, if this lit fire in your brain, you're gonna love video number 8 because we're diving into emotional safety and why it's the real reason people buy from you. So go hit that next video. Let's build a brand that connects, converts, and actually feels like you. Like always, if this helped you, please subscribe, like, comment, and share so more business owners like you can stop working harder and start working smarter with more clarity, more trust, and more time for what matters most. All right, family, I'll see you on the next one.